are listening to the most comprehensive paranormal archive on the internet.
Welcome to Salsido Paranormal. I'm your host, James Salsido, and tonight I'm continuing my series review, The Book of the Damned by Charles Fort. As always, you can find all episodes of the show along with links to social media and ways to support the show and friends of the show, including Jen, the Arcane Observer, who has her own channel and is the co-host of this show, on the website, and that is salsidoparanormal.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.com, and go from there. A few things I always like to note when I start these shows. First of all, there have been, and there probably still will be, things that Fort says in his books that you and or I may not agree with. Second, there may be things he talks about, and he describes as being mysterious that over the course of the last 100 years or so since these books came out, have been basically figured out and are not mysterious anymore. And then the last thing, of course, is I apologize in advance for mispronouncing any names of people and or places, as words are hard, and not all the words in this book are even in English. In these books, I should say, there's probably many cases in other books that we'll cover after this one as well. There's three more books in this collection, which you can get through either Amazon, I believe, Kindle, or I believe there's other ways as well online. You can get the text anyway, and go from there and look at the books yourselves and read them all, sort of at your own pace, and reread them as well. But yeah, so let's get back into this book here. I think we're on the last chapter, if not, maybe one more after this, of this particular book, but we will see. Okay, continuing on here. Quotation marks. The impression of the foot, and this is regarding these mysterious footprints found across the region of Devonshire in England, that went through snow and over buildings and through gardens and things. So really fascinating, anomalous, possibly event there. The impression of the foot closely resembles that of a donkey's shoe, and measured from 1.5 inches in some instances to 2.5 inches across. End quotation marks. Or the impressions were cones in incomplete or crescentic basins, so like crescent shaped. The diameters equaled diameters of very young colt's hooves, too small to be compared with marks of donkey's hooves. And quotation marks. On Sunday last, the Reverend Mr. Musgrave alluded to the subject in his sermon and suggested the possibility of the footprints being those of a kangaroo. But this could scarcely have been the case, as they were found on both sides of the este. At present, it remains a mystery, and many superstitious people in the above-named towns are actually afraid to go outside their doors after night. Close quotation marks. The este is a body of water 2 miles wide. Wow, okay. London Times, March 6th, 1855. Quotation marks. The interest in this matter has scarcely yet subsided. Many inquiries still being made into the origin of the footprints, which caused so much consternation upon the morning of the 8th. In addition to the circumstances mentioned in the Times. I feel like, okay, so it's still quotation marks here. In addition to the circumstances, I wonder if it was supposed to be looks like it was supposed to be a close quotation marks there, but it's not there. Typo, I guess. In addition to the circumstances mentioned in the Times a little while ago, it may be, maybe this is still quotation marks, I'm not sure. It may be stated that at Dawlish, a number of persons sallied out, armed with guns and other weapons, for the purpose, if possible, of discovering and destroying the animal which was supposed to have been so busy in multiplying its footprints. As might have been expected, the party returned as they went. Various speculations, I guess this is still a quotation, various speculations have been made as to the cause of the footprints. Some have asserted that they are those of a kangaroo, while others affirm that they are the impressions of claws of large birds, driven ashore by stress of weather. On more than one occasion, reports have been circulated that an animal from a menagerie had been caught, but the matter at present is as much involved in mystery as ever it was, close quotation marks. That was just a really long quote. In the Illustrated London News, the occurrence is given a great deal of space. In the issue of February 24th, 1855, a sketch is given of the prints. I call them cones in incomplete basins, except that they're a little longish. They look like prints of hoofs of horses, or rather of colts. But they're in a single line. It is said that the marks from which the sketch was made were 8 inches apart, and that the spacing was regular and invariable, in quotation marks, in every parish, close quotation marks. Also, other towns besides those named in the Times are mentioned. The writer, who had spent a winter in Canada and was familiar with tracks in the snow, says that he had never seen, in quotation marks, a more clearly defined track, close quotation marks. Also, he brings out the point that was so persistently disregarded by Professor Owen and the other correlators, that, in quotation marks, no known animal walks in a line of single footsteps, not even man, close quotation marks. With these wider inclusions, this writer concludes with us that the marks were not footprints. It may be that his following observation hits upon the crux of the whole occurrence, that whatever it may have been that had made the marks, it had removed rather than pressed the snow. That's fascinating. So they're not footprints, they're almost like carving in snow or sculpting in snow. According to his observations, the snow looked, in quotation marks, as if branded with a hot iron, close quotation marks. Illustrated London News, March 3rd, 1855-214. Professor Owen, to whom a friend had sent drawings of the prints, writes that there were claw marks. He says that the track, quotation marks, was made by a badger, as in a single one. 6 other witnesses sent letters to this number of the news. One mentioned, but not published, is a notion of a strayed swan. Always this homogeneous seeing. A badger, a swan, a track. I should have listed the other towns as well as those mentioned in the Times. A letter from Mr. Musgrave is published. He, too, sends a sketch of the prince. It, too, shows a single line. There are 4 prints, of which the third is a little out of line. There is no sign of a claw mark. The prints look like prints of longish hoofs of a very young colt, but they are not so definitely outlined as in the sketch of February 24th, as if drawn after disturbance by wind or after thawing had set in. Measurements at places a mile and a half apart gave the same interspacing, in quotation marks, exactly 8 inches and a half apart, close quotation marks. We now have a little study in the psychology and genesis of an attempted correlation. Mr. Musgrave says, in quotation marks, I found a very apt opportunity to mention the name kangaroo, in allusion to the report then current, close quotation marks. He says that he had no faith in the kangaroo story himself, but was glad, in quotation marks, that a kangaroo was in the wind, close quotation marks, because it opposed, in quotation marks, a dangerous, degrading, and false impression that it was the devil, close quotation marks. So that's fascinating. I mean, I kind of get it. People are freaked out thinking it's this evil entity, whether it is the or a devil, I don't know. But then you have people that are giving this explanation for these marks as a kangaroo, not because it makes the most sense, but because they'd rather have it be that, which I understand in a way, than, and again, the devil or a devil. So that's fascinating. And I think you see that in modern reports or non-reports. You see that in people's experiences. They don't, because things don't make sense, they'd rather find something that does make sense, even if it barely makes sense, as an explanation for an experience. I lost my spot. Okay, there we go. Excuse me. In quotation marks, mine was a word in season and did good, close quotation marks. Whether it's Jesuitical or not, and no matter what it is or isn't, that is our own acceptance, that though we've often been carried away from this attitude controversially, that is our acceptance as to every correlate of the past that has been considered in this book relatively to the dominant of its era. Another correspondent writes that though the prints in all cases resembled hoof marks, can't talk tonight, wow, there were indistinct traces of claws that an otter, again one otter, had made the marks. After that, many other witnesses wrote to the news. The correspondence was so great that in the issue of March 10th, a selection could be given. There's a jumping rat solution and a hopping toad inspiration, and then someone came out strong with an idea of a hare that had galloped with pairs of feet held close together so as to make impressions in a single line. Yeah, this is all getting more and more, seems like more and more unlikely. London Times, March 14th, 1840. That's our spot. There we go. In quotation marks, among the high mountains of that elevated district where Glenorchy, Glenlyon, and Glenorchy are contiguous, there have been met with several times during this and also the former winter upon the snow the tracks of an animal seemingly unknown at present in Scotland. The print, in every respect, is an exact resemblance to that of a foal of considerable size, with this small difference, perhaps, that the sole seems a little longer, or not so round. But as no one has had the good fortune as yet to have obtained a glimpse of the creature, nothing more can be said of its shape or dimensions. Only it has been remarked from the depth to which the feet sank in the snow that it must be a beast of considerable size. It has been observed also that its walk is not like that of the generality of quadrupeds, but that it is more like the bounding or leaping of a horse when scared or pursued. It is not in one locality. Its tracks have been met with, but through a range of at least 12 miles, quotation marks. In the Illustrated London News, March 17th, 1855, a correspondent from Heidelberg writes, upon the authority of a Polish doctor of medicine, quotation marks, that on the Piaszawa Gora, which is a quotation mark sand hill, a small elevation on the border of Galicia, but in Russian Poland. Okay. Must have been a different time there where that was the case. Such marks, I'm not the best with history, so I apologize if I shouldn't be surprised at that. Such marks are to be seen in the snow every year, and sometimes in the sand of this hill, and are attributed by the inhabitants to supernatural influences. Some of that was in quotation marks. But anyway, that's fascinating. So you have these weird marks appearing not just in that one region, but yeah, in other regions as well. And funny enough, that is where the Book of the Damned ends, which is fascinating. So we will just do a quick preview here. I guess we'll just, yeah. So the next book is going to be New Lands. And this is, again, getting into different things, different topics. I'm guessing here, if I remember correctly, these lands in the sky, as Fort talked about in the first book, in the book we just finished reading, which is pretty huge because it took us a while to get through all these shows. And of course, these shows are being recorded sort of in advance of when they'll come out, but really amazed that we've got through so much. There is just a ton there I'm not going to start the next book here. I'm not going to start New Lands because I'd rather be able to have the titles of the shows be accurate. There's so much that has been covered in the Book of the Damned. You have falling objects, so substances, but also stones and animals. He does touch on things like objects that seem to be from a later time found in coal, which indicates that it was there for a long time before it should have been. So really, this book does cover a lot of different things. The falls of objects, they are a huge part of it. But he covers lights as well. Anomalous lights in the sky, anomalous objects in the sky, just in general, shadows, mixes of both. So stones, again, different types, shapes of stones, weird markings in the ground. He calls them cup marks in some cases. And he talks about this idea of, again, as I always say, aliens and or UFOs before those words, those terms, ever got to be popular. Basically just other beings visiting here, and all that they leave, if they visit here at all physically, all that they leave are weird marks in stone all across the world. And even in this last section here with the marks found in the snow, that's fascinating. And he mentioned sort of a similar idea that these are not actually tracks of a creature. They are marks left by something that removed or burnt through, I guess, the snow in these particular spots. But because, again, people don't know how to explain all this, the best thing they can think of is, well, it must be tracks, it must be footprints of some kind. And this is the amazing thing about Fort, is that he goes to sort of some of the most anomalous explanations for things. And not even necessarily, he doesn't necessarily say this is all happening, this is all true, this is all accurate. He's not saying, I know what's causing all this, and here you go, here are all the answers. He gives his ideas on what they all could be, but if I'm not mistaken, he doesn't really say that this is all exactly what it is. And I like that, and I wish, it seems like nowadays there's more and more of this idea that we have to know everything, and we know everything that's about, if I can talk, we have explanations for all that is anomalous, but if we talk to people that have experiences, like myself, like many others, we would have something to say about that. There would definitely not be an agreement in that. And as I always say, there's no amount of proof that will ever convince everyone that anomalous, paranormal, supernatural experiences happen the way that people seem to feel that they happen or experience for themselves. But this has been great. I hope you all enjoyed this series, because it's been a lot of fun, despite sort of getting used to the way Charles Fort writes. And I'm sure by the time I get done with the last book, I'll be totally used to it, and then not have to read it again for quite a while, if ever. So, but that's okay. That's how it goes. But next time in one of these shows, in this series on Fort's books, we will talk about his next book, New Lands. And thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all next time on Salsido Paranormal. Take care.